Welcome to the Windows Partner Training, Module 12, Enterprise Data Protection. I'm Dave Field from Microsoft Partner Services. We're going to start off by talking about the information protection journey and what is covered today and what some of the gaps are that need to be dealt with. As we look at device protection, we've had some really good offerings for protecting data on the device. The BitLocker enhancements in Windows 8.1, third-party disk encryption tools, and the Instant Go or connected standby capabilities of the operating system. On the data protection end of the spectrum, we've got rights management services, both AD rights management and Azure rights management services. We have IRM for Office for information management, but we always had an opportunity to deal with the middle piece. The middle piece is really around unintentional or accidental data disclosure, either via email, via file sharing, or so on. And typically this has been filled by third-party solutions, but we saw a need to start looking at more of a platform level solution for this. So others are filling the gap by creating some sandbox type environments or containerizing the files and kind of having that switching mode experience for users. Others would require different sorts of applications, so users wouldn't be working in their customary word processor or spreadsheet program. They would require that application to be changed to something more secure. And the experience between mobile systems and desktop systems was not consistent. It was a different approach to secure different platforms. And many of these solutions were quite expensive to implement. So as we look at finding the balance, we find this trade-off that historically has been there around compromised user experience versus higher cost and more complexity. And so to try to balance that, Microsoft has explored a platform level solution with enterprise data protection. So our vision for this is to take this to the platform level so that the platform and the applications that deal with organizational data are enlightened and are aware of their role in protecting email, social media, public cloud sharing of enterprise data. So as we look at how this is done, we need to understand that this requires data to be protected wherever it might be at any given time. Data isn't always on a device. It isn't always in transit over secure networks. It can get into places where we don't have a lot of control. So how can we place control on that data and have that be protected? We also have to have the ability to make this data go away, and if the device in question is no longer enrolled in the organization. And the data protection needs to be supported by the applications we use every day. We don't want to have to learn a new word processor or a new spreadsheet in order to interact with the data. So enter Windows 10 Enterprise Data Protection. This is a slightly different approach to the way things have been done in the past. It's designed around mobile and desktop, and it's really takes us to the platform level so that we can control this with the platform management solutions we already have in place. So this would work with mobile device management perhaps to control policy around this and give us the capabilities we need. So the Enterprise Data Protection solution that's under development is designed to protect data at rest and while we're roaming. It's integrated with the platform itself, so there's no mode switching. We actually enlighten the applications themselves to understand their role. And these are controlled by IT policy, so IT administrators can identify the policies around what happens to personal data versus what happens to corporate data, and whether data can move across this divide. And finally, at the end of the experience, IT controls this process and they control the encryption keys, so they have the ability to remotely wipe and remove that data off devices. Another part of this is how this performs when a system is in operation. We wanted the ability to have the data inaccessible in a way when a user locks their device. So as part of this, you have an optional group policy that can control the ability to lock the data store on the device when the device is not in use. Screen lock would actually cause the decryption key to be removed from the device, and there would be no process on the system that would be able to read the data at that point. Now, when if you have an application that is storing data in the process of writing data to the device, the encryption key is still available, and you can still encrypt and store data, but the ability to read from the device would be restricted. And this is mostly designed to prevent those sorts of malware that operate when a device is at idle. When a user walks away, their screensaver kicks in or their system screen locks, and malware detects that and starts scanning a drive. If you had something like that on a device with this protection in place, it would not be able to read that data. So as we look at how this goes, let's look at a few scenarios and understand how the data flows and works within this type of environment. So for just kind of general provisioning and setting up the environment, it would start with a user enrolling in the mobile device management or doing a domain join or an Azure domain join to enroll a device. Through that policy or through that process, they would enroll in mobile device management or get their configuration manager settings set up, and then MDM or configuration manager takes it from there. Policies are created to allow managed applications to control network ingress and egress, and as well as application behavior on a device. All right, so let's take a look at what EDP looks like, or Enterprise Data Protection looks like, when we're looking at a device platform and how we're managing this segmentation between enterprise or organizational data and that data which is considered private. As we look at enterprise data protection, we have this concept of a separation between work and personal applications. This is done through management policy, and the applications themselves can be enlightened to understand how to manage data appropriately based on this policy. So we have a kind of a concept of a managed application, which we control through this policy, which understands its role with corporate data. Data would be flagged as corporate or personal. Data coming onto the device would be stored as corporate data with corporate encryption keys placed on it, and personal data would be stored in normal format. Going forward, if data was to be transitioned from the protected policy to an unprotected status, it could be blocked completely or it could be audited. So as these policies are configured, you would determine what happens to these capabilities. If data is audited, the user would be alerted to the fact that it's an audit policy, that their transmission of data from a corporate storage to a personal OneDrive or maybe over personal email would be an audited action, and then they could choose whether they wanted to still do that. And with integration with Azure Rights Management Services, you have the capability of transmitting this data in a business-to-business scenario or even to unprotected storage, as long as that Azure RMS or Rights Management Services capability is involved, because that maintains the encryption into that channel. And finally, you can have network policies to require that data might be transmitted only over a VPN connection, for instance. So that it would never be over a public unencrypted internet feed, as an example. So an example of a data ingress policy, data coming from a corporate source such as OneDrive for Business, you could have a restriction where it would have to be transmitted across an encrypted network. So perhaps this could only come to you via a VPN connection or maybe SSL. Now, once the data is on the device, the user is working with a file and wants to save it locally. It might have come from a corporate source, so it's already got that corporate tag on it. It's time now to store it to a disk. So it would automatically be saved to an enterprise folder. Encryption on that folder is automatically applied. If it's new data, the user has an option to save as corporate, which would also place it in that partition. Thereafter, enlightened applications know how to automatically interact with that data and maintain that protection, plus IT can control the policy going forward. All right, so let's take a look at now sharing this over maybe a third-party file share or across the internet. As data leaves the device, we can have policies that control the sort of networks that it could be shared over. Perhaps we have a policy that requires a VPN back to corp, and the data can only be stored on a managed location in the corporate environment. Or perhaps if we have enlightened storage locations, such as some of the capabilities that are being brought to Dropbox or Box.com to work with Azure Rights Management, perhaps we can allow that as well. Furthermore, we can control egress of the data or the information from one application to another. So we can have an application restriction policy that restricts cut, copy, paste between applications, either enlightened versus non-enlightened and so forth. So those sorts of policies can be maintained. And then finally, we need to have the ability to control what happens when this data gets shared again on another platform. So if we have iOS or Android devices as part of the environment, we have to maintain the protections as our data goes to these platforms as well. So with the protections we already have in place with Azure Rights Management, a lot of this infrastructure is already there. We have RMS readers already available for iOS and Android platforms. So by linking this with Rights Management, we extend the capability of controlling this enterprise data as it goes to these third-party platforms as well. At the end of the day, we also need to be able to get the data from the device removed. The device leaves management, maybe the user has left the company or the device has been lost or stolen. We need the ability to get that data removed. By unenrolling the device or by forcing unenroll from the administrator's portal, we have the ability to remove the keys that protect the data on the device, which basically renders it useless, and then actually start a selective wipe to wipe all corporate apps and data from the drive. So this basically completes a life cycle journey for the data from initial provisioning, management with mobile device management, moving into the protection of the data during its use with enlightened applications, and then finally to revoking access at the end of the device's life cycle. So this process completes a continuum of protection from the device itself through to the network and the sharing capabilities, and then covering that accidental data leakage with enterprise data protection policy. And this basically completes the vision for what enterprise data protection is going to be for Windows 10. If you're on the Windows Insider program, you will soon have the ability to preview this, and this will be implemented as we get farther into the next build of Windows coming to the public. This has been Enterprise Data Protection. My name is Dave Field. Thank you for listening.